Very happy to be with each of you here this morning, especially as we look at the events around us. You know, these last couple of years have been quite a roller coaster ride, hasn't it been? You know, first we had this whole issue with COVID, and now it seems like everyone's forgotten a lot about COVID. You know, even though we've had quite a bit of sickness, some even died. Some of our friends have passed away. And so for some of us, it's lingering, the whole issues of COVID. And then everything now is raging around Ukraine. The whole news, it's constantly there. Updates are constantly going in about the war in Ukraine. And obviously, the question that we look at is prophetic implications in regards to things like this. That's what we look at. Does prophecy speak about some of these things? Now, why is it that when things like the war in Ukraine happen, when things like COVID, a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic happens, why is it that we have a revived interest in prophecy? It's quite simple. In Matthew chapter 24, the chapter dealing with the events showing the second coming of Jesus Christ, we find here that there are certain things that we can look at. And in verse 6 and 7, we find there, ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquake in divers places. This is prophecy. And so when there is a war, what happens? We start looking at prophecy and the implications of prophecy. Now, when we think about prophecy, why is prophecy so important for us? Amos 3 and verse 7 says, surely the Lord will do nothing, but he revealeth his secrets unto his servants, the prophets. In other words, everything around us is there to deceive. A mask is designed to do what? To deceive, to cover up something. And prophecy removes the mask. It removes it. It shows you what's actually happening that you may not think is happening, but it shows you exactly what is happening. And so when we are looking at prophetic events, you know, we have it does something to us. And, you know, when we look at these things and we look at the comparison with prophecy, it should make something happen to us. And in 1 Thessalonians 5, it says, but ye brethren are not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. Ye are all children of the light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. Therefore let us not what? Sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. So when we look at the events of prophecy, we should do what? We should be awake to know what's happening, that we are not caught by surprise. And many things are catching people by surprise. In Gospel Work, it says, those who teach and preach the most effectively are those who wait humbly upon God and watch hungrily for his guidance and his grace. Are you hungry for his guidance and grace? You know what happens when you're hungry? You want to eat something, and I want to eat it now. So you have fast food restaurants. Why? Because it's fast food. It may not be good food, but it's fast. And you want it now. Okay? And are we that hungry for his guidance? Or is it something that we have scheduled? And then it says here we should be doing something. Watch, pray, and work. This is the Christian's watchword. So what is it? You know, we hear about prayer, but what about You know, it's watching to pay attention to what is happening around us, praying for God's guidance, and then what? It has to translate into work. When watching and praying leads you to be terrified of society and terrified of everything around you, then you miss the point. It's designed to make us work. The life of a true Christian is a life of constant prayer. He knows that the light and strength of one day is not sufficient for the trials and conflicts of the next. Satan is continually changing his temptations. You get used to one, he brings it from another way. Every day we shall be placed in different circumstances, and in untried scenes that await us, we shall be surrounded by fresh dangers and constantly assailed by new and unexpected temptations. It is only through the strength and grace gained from heaven that we can hope to meet the temptations and perform the duties before us. You can't do your work. You can't do anything unless you get the strength that we can have from heaven. So, as we look at what has been happening in this world, the economy just seemed to have been calming down. Everything started getting back to normal, and now we have the Ukraine war there going on. And it has changed the price of fuel. You watched it rise very dramatically. Food is going to be in short supply. Ukraine and Russia supply about 30% of the world's grain. 30% of the world's grain is right there. And right now they're supposed to be planting, and instead of planting, there is war. Okay? Russia supplies a large percentage of the world's fertilizer. I noticed Brazil was over there just before all this happened, went to try to negotiate something because they're dependent upon that Russian fertilizer. So the economy has been turned upside down all over again. Someone told me the other day they announced that there's going to be peace in Ukraine, and the stock market shot up, and half an hour later they said, that was not real, and it fell down again. Okay, that's what's happening in the world today. And obviously, when we see events like this, we start thinking of things like Daniel chapter 11. Complicated little prophecy sometimes. So when we look at Daniel chapter 11, especially the last few verses, in the last couple of years, I've been hearing that the king of the north is identified as the papacy. And of course, right now with the war in Ukraine, I've heard that Russia is supposed to be now the king of the north. And so, you take a look at some of these things and you're wondering what's happening. Well, this morning we want to take a look at some of these things, especially how they relate to our preparation, because there's a final crisis coming on this world, and we need to look at some of these things. We're not going to read every verse here. We have a lot of things to cover here to try to understand at least something of Daniel 8. But we will take a look at some things. First of all, we need to understand a basic principle, and that is, you find this in 2 Peter 1:20, that no prophecy of the scriptures is of any private interpretation. That's number one. We need to understand that God has a system. If you understand that system, you will understand the prophecy. It's not limited to a certain group of people. It is limited only by our connection with God and the use of the scriptures. This is why in fundamentals of Christian education, it says the Bible is its own expositor. So we can look to the Bible and it'll tell us what it means. One passage will prove to be a key. One passage will prove to be a key that will unlock other passages. And in this way, light will be shed upon the hidden meaning of the word. By comparing different texts treating on the same subject, viewing their bearing on every side, the true meaning of the scriptures will be made evident. And again, this is in the context of a person that's asking God for wisdom. It's not just going on your own, opening it up like a history book or like any other book. It is God needs to be the one that is guiding you. So then, when we look at Daniel chapter 11, especially when we're looking at the final verses there, we have to look at the whole context there of what it's talking about, not just coming somewhere in the middle. In reality, when we look at the book of Daniel, chapter 10, 11, and 12 are actually one thing. They are not divided. And so you have to look at the concern that Daniel had. And in chapter 10, verse 1, he was concerned about something that had to do with time. And he says he was concerned that that the thing was true, but the time appointed was what? Was long. And just before that, we had just finished looking at the 2,300-day prophecy, or 2,300 years. It's the longest prophecy in the Bible, covering a period of 2,300 years. Okay? And that's why he says the time appointed was long. And Daniel began praying, and there was a delay in the prayer. Daniel's praying every day, and he's not getting any information. And finally, in verse 13, when the angel came, he says, the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. So I've been trying to come here, but I was busy with the king of Persia. 21 days he was delaying me. And we don't have time to go in, and most probably it was because of the Cyrus had commanded the children of Israel to go back into out of Babylonian captivity to Jerusalem and build a temple, and they weren't interested. And so then he lost interest. And now when he started losing interest, the devil brought other temptations to him, and he started getting wishy-washy on his principles, and God couldn't have that. So the angel goes there 21 days, and finally what does he do? He gets the assistance of Michael to come there. And he remained there with him while I'm coming here to answer your questions here. And then I'm going back over there to make sure things are happening. Now I want to notice verse 14, the concern that Daniel had. And this is the answer. It says, now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days. So the vision is still, it's for a long period of time. It's going to, again, 2,300 days. That's a long time. But I'm going to share with you, and the purpose of this vision is not just to give you information. The purpose is what? To understand what shall happen to the people of God in the last days. That's the concern of the whole vision. That's what we need to look at. And now, what we need to understand here, and we're just covering it briefly again, okay? This is not a seminar, so I'm going to go through it. If you have not clear on certain aspects, we'd be more than happy to go through and explain a little bit more in detail, but not for a divine service, okay? So now, he sets the stage for what is happening here. And again, the issue of king of the north and king of the south, which goes throughout chapter 11, and especially down at the very end, it has really important implications. He sets it up. And he starts in verse 2. He says, and now I will show you the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. And the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So what we find here is that there are 3 more kings. They're going to be, so there's Cyrus plus 3 more. And then the 4th one is going to be very wealthy. And he's going to, as a very wealthy person, what does he want? What does a very wealthy, filthy, rich person want? More. Okay, so he stirs up everybody against the kingdom of Greece. Okay, so obviously there's a great conflict between Medo-Persia and Greece during the time of this 4th king after Cyrus. And ultimately what shall happen? In verse 3, a mighty king shall stand up. Okay, the context here is, if you read the context, it's the king of Greece that shall stand up. And according to Daniel 8, verse 21, which is a parallel prophecy, it shows that that first king, that big king is what? It's the first king. And we know this first king is who? Alexander the Great. We're familiar with that. That's there. So here is the first king that shall come there. And then it goes on. What shall happen? Let's go back to Daniel 11, verse 4. And when he shall stand up, this first king, Alexander the Great, what shall happen? His kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. This is the foundation that we're looking at for the rest of the prophecy. It's very clear that what happens? Whose kingdom is broken? It's Alexander's kingdom is broken. And it's broken in which directions? 4 different directions. And what are they? But what are they? They are what? North, south, east, and west. Okay? So this is the breaking up of Alexander's kingdom, or Alexander's territory. That's what it is. Okay? And so when you are studying the rest of this chapter, if you want to know who the king of the north is, where do you look for? You don't come up with what's convenient today. You don't look at what's convenient. You don't look at how you feel. It has to be in relation to what? To Alexander's empire. That's what its relationship is. It's not to anything else. And so when you look at the map, this was the Grecian Empire. And you have to look at, when you look at the western part is way over there in Greece itself. The northern part is up there, the eastern here, and the south down there. That's what you have. And it's in relationship to that you find who is the king of the north. There are more northern kingdoms than this. Yeah, there is something more north of that. But that's not the king of the north. Why not? Because it was the relationship to the division of Alexander's empire. And you start with verse 5. It begins immediately. And if you look at history and compare history, you will see the historical development one with the other. And when one conquers that area, what do they become? The king of the north. That's what it is. When someone conquers that area called Egypt, what do they become? The king of the south. That's what you have there. And the conflict in Daniel 11, not so much is there between the west and the east. Okay, and the reason being is because the guy that had the east conquered the north and conquered the west, and he became the king of all of that area. But he was there. And when Rome conquered that area, what did they become? And not before they conquered. It's when they conquered, that's when they become the king of that area. And when they lose that territory, what happens? Then whoever conquers there is the king of that area. We find also later on, I'm skipping quite a few verses here, simply because we want to get to the last 2 verses. That's what the interest is, you see. Okay, in chapter 11, verse 31 to 34, if you look at Daniel 7:25, you will find a similarity between that and the papacy. It says, "And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily." The word sacrifice is added. So this is speaking of the ministration of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary. "And they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall be corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword, and by the flame, and by captivity, and by spoil many days. So here, this is going to happen. For how long? For many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flattery. So even though there's going to be a few people that are going to stand for the truth, but the majority love flatteries. The majority like people to say how good you are. Okay, people don't like it when you say this is a defect. They like to see how good you are. Okay, and so they're going to be able to accomplish all of that. And it shall be for how long, it says? Many days. Okay, now, again, you can read Daniel 7, verse 25. In that verse, it tells you the many days given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. And we're familiar with this time frame. Again, if you're not, we can have studies together. Not a problem to clarify things. But this is the time of great tribulation. And you find this in Matthew 24. We read a little bit from Matthew 24 earlier. For then shall be great tribulation, such as never was since the beginning of the world to this time. No, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be shortened. So there is this period of time, the 1260 days, mentioned in Daniel 7:25. There's that period, but what has to happen to it? It has to be what? Shortened. Why? People would not survive that. And we can see that this tribulation is especially on whom? Who is the one suffering especially on this tribulation? It's the elect. So this tribulation is the elect. When you get to Daniel 12, it mentions a similar passage, but it says upon the nations. Okay, so that's a different tribulation. This is one that is especially on God's people. And we know that this was the period that went from 538 till 1798 and ends in 1798. And again, if you want to get clear on that, we can happily do that. Now, and then there is a time period that that this papal supremacy comes to an end. In verse 35 of Daniel 11, and some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. Now, it does not say here till the end of time. I want you to pay attention to that. So there is an end of time, which means there is what? No more time. But there is a period called what? The time of the end. And so this persecution in the previous verses that we just read goes until we have the time of the end. And what is to happen during this time of the end? We look at Daniel 12, verse 4. Verse 9 repeats the same thing. It says, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book. So the book of Daniel, what was to happen with it? It was to be sealed. How long? Even to the time of the end. So people are not going to understand the book of Daniel very well. But when the time of the end begins, then what? Knowledge shall be increased, not only knowledge in technical things, but knowledge in the Word of God. And this is why in Great Controversy it says, but since 1798, the book of Daniel has been unsealed. Why? Because it took us to the time of the end, and now begins the time of understanding these prophecies. So 1798 is a critical year. Now, what is to happen in 1798? This is around the year 1798, because that's the time of the end. And the king shall do according to his will. And many people read this as a continuation of the papacy beforehand. But a lot of the commentators clearly show that it's not the article the, but a king. It's another entity. And we'll see here that this cannot refer to the papal system. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. And it sounds like the papacy. It goes on, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. Well, this cannot be spoken about the papal system. It says here, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. Actually, in Catholicism, they claim to do what? They claim to worship the God, the true God. They're not saying this is not the God of our fathers. So this cannot be referring to that. But in his estate, in the estate of God, he shall honor the God of forces and a God whom his fathers knew not. Again, in Catholicism, are they talking about a God that they don't know about? It's not true. They may make some deceptions about it, but at the same time, it's not a God that they don't know about. And it goes on. And this is why when we look at this, we can clearly see that this has to do with some atheistic power around 1798. And surely at that time, we do have the French Revolution, in which God was thrown out, that God does not exist. They worship the God of reason. That's what it says there. And that's why we believe that that would have to deal not with the papal system, but the French Revolution instead. And now notice here, we're in 1798, and at the time of the end, when? At that time. So in 1798, so we have to look at the year 1798, something shall happen. Shall the king of the south push at him? Okay, push does not give you a very strong picture, does it? The context, again, just before this was the French Revolution. And so you have the king of the south, which was where? Which was Egypt. That's what we saw there in the picture. Whoever is controlling the Egypt is the king of the south. And so now here's this atheistic power, or this representative of France, coming at him, and he only pushes at him. It's quite interesting. In the year 1798, Egypt was actually its own power. It was under its own control. Now, what does this mean? Obviously, it shows some weakness on their part. On May 24th, 1798, which year? 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte conquered Egypt. He was in Cairo on May 24th, 1798, exactly at that time. And there was very weak resistance by the Egyptians. They had no chance to stand against the army of Napoleon. And so when Napoleon then conquers Egypt and he takes control of Egypt, what does he become? Of what? Of the south, exactly. He becomes now the king of the south because he now controls that territory. And that's why, he becomes the king of the south. Okay, so the context here is looking at that territory. Now, the king of the north in 1798 was occupied by the Ottoman Empire at that time. That was centered there in Turkey. And notice this, the reaction. Okay, so the first part of this verse shows that the king of the south shall push at him against Napoleon, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. Does this show? So there was weak resistance on the part of Egypt. He becomes the king of the south. But how about the king of the north, the Ottoman Empire with that area, with chariot, like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. In other words, what's the king of the north going to do? He's going to overwhelm who? which is who? Napoleon. That's what we're going to expect now. If we're looking at this verse, that's what we're expecting at this time. And so on February 27th, 1799, Napoleon began his march for the conquest of Syria. So he wanted to go, what he was trying to do, he was trying to go to Syria and through there go into India, because his squabble was with Great Britain. That was his real squabble. And he thought he can do it this way. Now, the Ottoman, together with the British, because the British had a fleet, and it was under Sir Sidney Smith. He was the captain. He was the one in charge of that, admiral for that. And so the Ottomans united together with the British, and on May 21st, 1799, for the first time in his career, Napoleon sounded his first note of retreat. And, later on in life, Napoleon, speaking of Sidney Smith, he says, that man made me miss my destiny. And you have here, it was up here that the battle was there. He came from Egypt, Napoleon went to Saint Jean d'Arc, gone up there, laid siege to the city, and everything was going fine until Sidney Smith came with his British fleet. And finally he had to give up. He went back. He went back to Egypt. And soon thereafter, he was called to go back to France. So he went to France and left his generals in charge, and they died in the battle, and that was the end of France in that time frame. So now I want to look at the last days. This is what we want to look at the last few minutes here, to look at some of these events, because the context are those verses. And basically, this leads us to the last two verses of the chapter. And it's interesting. When we go to verse 44, after speaking about what happens there with France and all that, it says, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. This is now the king of the north is now conquered, Napoleon there, and now tidings. What are tidings? News. Okay, news reports are coming. And news reports from where? From the east and the north shall trouble him. Now, this does not say that's the king of the east and the king of the north. That's not what it says. It says tidings out of the east. News coming from the east, and news coming from the north shall trouble who? The king of what? Not the south, the king of the north, because the north is the one that conquered everything there in the previous verses. Therefore, when he hears this tidings, what does he do? He shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. So the reaction of the king of the north is to do what? When he hears these tidings, he gets unsettled, and there is great destruction. So it all begins with news. So, what are the tidings that are of interest in all of this? What are tidings that we're talking about that create such a reaction? We read this at the very beginning. What are issues that you're going to be hearing about? What's the news going to be about? Wars and rumors of war. And we've been listening to what? Rumors of war for a long time, and then all of a sudden war. Okay? So these are things that are of interest. Now, why are wars at the center of all of this? Right now, the war in Ukraine. Why is the war in Ukraine so interesting? It's grabbing the interest of all the nations around the world. Why is it?
Fear.
Fear is one thing, but this is something else. You know, speaking about Revelation 7, the four mighty angels hold back the powers of this earth till the servants of God are sealed in their foreheads. So there's the work of sealing going on. And then it says what? The nations of the world are what? Eager for a fight. Eager for conflict. But they are held in check by the angels. When this restraining power is removed, there will come a time of trouble and anguish. So what happens? All the nations are eager for a conflict. They're looking for battle. You know, in this last few weeks, I've been listening to some detailed reporting a little bit more about the history of NATO and all this kind of stuff, and you're listening to all this stuff, and, you listen to it, and it's interesting. You can have, if you're going to sit here and go through agreements, both sides actually have some points on both sides, okay? But one thing I know is it doesn't matter what agreement they had, what do they want? What do they want? What do the nations want? They want, and to get the power, what do they want? They want war. That's a fact. So they have their wars in readiness. So what is keeping them back? What's keeping back from World War III, World War IV, whatever it can be? What's keeping it back from a nuclear disaster? 4 angels. Why? Because of you and me. Because we're still sitting around doing our thing and taking our time. That's why. And God is merciful to us. He looks at us and says, those poor people over there in Roanoke, we need to give them a little bit more time. And we can thank the Lord for that, but we need to wake up out of sleep. That's what it said, right? Okay? So the nation, this war issue, how long will the peace hold? It's not going to hold. It's not a matter of holding it. God is interfering with them. Okay? That's why there's peace. God interferes for our sake that we can have a bit more time. Okay. So the tension between the Ottoman Empire, which is today is Turkey, is not a new one. This is not something new. It's interesting. There was something called the Crimean War. Have you heard of the Crimean War? Have you heard of Crimea recently? Yes. Okay. Now, the Crimean War was between 1853 and 1856, and Russia was on one side, and there were the Allied powers. And the Allied powers were France, the Ottoman Empire, the United Kingdom, and today what is called Italy. Does it sound familiar? What are these nations part of? They're part of something called NATO. It's the same alliance. For the last 150 to almost 200 years, it's been the same alliance against Russia. The same thing. Nothing has changed. And so when you look at this map here, this is the northern part there, and straight north, you bump right into Crimea. Is that in that sea there? You see that big peninsula coming out? That's Crimea. That's the Crimean Peninsula. In 1998, I had the privilege of going to Evpatoria. We had a church there that we went, and Susan was going to come join me, and somebody gave them some money. They gave her some money to help in a place of need. And I can't remember, it was $3,000 or $5,000 she had with her. And when we got there, they said, we need to finish the church. We can't afford to finish it. How much do you need? Exactly the amount that somebody sent. Exactly that amount to be able to build that church there. So if you look at the map, actually, let me just show you something else here real quickly here. I was just upstairs, and I took a look at this. There's Turkey there, the King of the North area. And look, straight north you go to Moscow. Just straight. There's Ankara right there. Do you see Ankara there? Straight north of Ankara is Moscow. That's what you find. It goes right through Ukraine. Okay, so you have here, when you're looking at the map, it says tidings from the north. And of course, that was during the Crimean War. There's Crimea right up there. That they had that war. Now, those Allied powers, what are they doing? Okay, they are eager for a conflict. And right now, if you look at the whole issue there with Ukraine is the issue with NATO. And again, we mentioned it's the same alliance, but now their concerns are why? Because the bombings that are happening now recently are very close to a NATO allied country. Okay, so they're just watching, and I was listening to the news this week of what would happen if they drop a bomb inadvertently or whatever else, or somebody sends the bomb and says it's from the Russians. Whatever it is, what happens? NATO is eager for conflict. They never had an actual war. Actually, NATO, since its existence, has never had an actual war. And now it's interesting here. There's two places that we have marked here in Turkey there. And can you imagine what those two things are? Military bases. Whose military bases? It's a United States military base as a support for NATO. It's right there. There's two military bases right there. The one is in Incirlik, and the other one is in Izmir, down here. Those are two military bases there. And so when we're looking at, and one of the Article 5 of NATO agreement is what? An attack on one country of NATO is an attack on all. That means if right now Poland, Latvia, one of those countries there, they're a part of NATO, if they are bombed, according to that, it was an attack against the United States. That's what it says. That's the actual NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And so they're looking for a war. Why? Because they are trying to deal with that. And now it's interesting here. Peter Dutton, he is the defense minister in Australia. And this week, it was quite interesting what he said. And this will give you some insight there. Peter Dutton has also ratcheted up his warnings about the strategic convergence between Russia and China, labeling their recent pact an unholy alliance, and warning Beijing may see the crisis in Ukraine as useful opportunity to coerce other nations in the region. Now, keep in mind in Daniel 11 it says what? Tidings from where? From the east. Did you ever look on the map? You know, you look at the map, you look at there where the King of the North place is, and you go east, and you go right into China. It goes right into India and China and all those areas. And it's tidings from there, news from there. And already, what is he saying in the news? Oh, listen to China. Where? It says there's something coming from the east, tidings from the east. And the whole last 2 weeks, you're listening to the news, and they're constantly complaining about China. China's saying one thing and doing something else and all this kind of stuff. It's the news, it's the tidings that are at issue. And we're finding both of these at issue here when you look at Daniel chapter 11. And what's the eventual result when the tidings from Russia and China, and not just tidings, it could be war with this NATO alliance. It says, speaking of the King of the North, when he hears these tidings, eventually what does he do? And he goes and has a reaction with a war, and he shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas, in the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. And clearly, somewhere along the line here, we have to look at, there is Jerusalem right there between what they always call the two seas. in the midst of this, when we're looking at the preparation for Armageddon, it's based on something. And remember the verses there in Isaiah and Micah? What did it say there? They're going to do what with war? Get rid of war, okay? They're going to completely get rid of war. It's interesting in Revelation 6, Jesus says what? Behold, I come as a what? Thief. When does Jesus come as a thief? So the element is they're expecting peace. So when you're comparing Isaiah and Micah, we're expecting that after there's a conflict between the tidings from the north and from the east, and the moving of the whoever is controlling the power, and NATO right now is controlling that power, so it very easily can be NATO instead of Turkey itself. And they're going to gather there in Jerusalem for what? For a peace conference. And the result of that peace conference is going to be what? Sudden destruction. And that's why it comes upon them as a thief. But in 1 Thessalonians, it talks about God's people. We are not to be caught up in that. So if you remember, in the other messages, it says they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into what? Into pruning hooks, right? Now it's interesting when you look at Joel. Instead of that, here it says, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare what? War. Wake up the mighty man. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I'm strong. Brethren, this is exactly the opposite. The same words, but opposite. God shows there's something opposite. And the weak ones, the ones who have nothing, that they're not weak, they say what? We are strong. Okay? And they're ready for war. And that reminds me a lot of the news recently. Weak nations saying, we are strong. And again, all of this is in the context of these great powers trying to control the world. And in Joel 3, it goes on. They're having an assembly together. Where? In the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is that same area there outside of Jerusalem. It's the same gathering there. And what happens when they move their capital to Jerusalem and begin all this process? What happens at that point? At that time, shall Michael stand up. That's the close of probation if we're studying our prophecies. It is when they move that capital there. And again, I'm looking in the context of today, and it's been the similar context. It's been the same allied powers since the 1850s, the same allied powers against Russia, uniting together. And when these allies move their capital to Jerusalem, together with the papal system power, at that time is the close of human probation. And that's when we can expect some of those final events. And what shall we expect at that time? Right after Michael stands up, in Joel it goes on, put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. And it's interesting, in Revelation chapter 14, we usually stop at verse 12. Sometimes we go to verse 13. But after the three angels' messages are put in, it says there, and I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. Okay, and another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. So soon after Michael stands up, then we find that there is the harvest of this world. And so when we're looking at these prophecies around us, you know, and we're comparing what's happening today, the incursion of Russia, they've been trying that since the Crimean War back in the 1850s. Okay, and the same allied powers are united together today, and the only difference is that in Daniel 11, you find that there is the issue of the kings of the tidings from the east are coming. Something something there from the east, the kings of the east, something there is being involved. But you know, all of these things, I'm sharing all of these things not just to give you information. The reason for this, the purpose of this information, we find in Luke chapter 21. You see, this is why we're looking at these things. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon. And it gives you a list of all these things. And then verse 28, And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. Brethren, as we're looking at these events, it should lead us to be excited. Why? Because our redemption is drawing nigh. But right now, we have a work to do, brethren. And again, it's not to be terrified of all these things. It's not to be building bunkers and preparing ourselves for the final events from a physical perspective. Jesus never says, go there and get your food source prepared, go hide somewhere in the mountains and stick your head in the sand over there in a cave somewhere and protect yourself and your family, because we have a message still to give to this world. And just with a hearing of the message there from this morning of the sister who shared from Ukraine, that the brethren now are finding an ample opportunity to share the gospel. This is why we're here in the middle of a war zone. They are sharing the gospel. And so what should we be doing? It goes on to the next verses, and this is down further. And this is what we need to be doing. And take heed to yourselves, brethren. This is the warning that we have. Take heed to yourself, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and the cares of this life, so that they come upon you unawares. And finally, verse 36, watch ye therefore, and pray always, that ye may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. That's what we should be concerned with. Preparing our hearts for the eternal world. This is not where we belong. This is not our home. And, you know, I remember when I was there in Chernovtsi, and I see them during time of economic prosperity, they were building beautiful mansions. Just going down the street there, you can see one beautiful mansion outdoing the next one and everything else. And a lot of that's going to disappear during the time of war. Okay, and why? It's to remind us that this is not our home. We can be building a beautiful place here. We can have a really nice place here. We can be comfortable, and it's nothing wrong to be comfortable. But if we're attached to it, God will take it away. Why? We don't need it, because that's not our home. This is not our home we're passing through. And these events, may the Lord help us that we can see what's really happening, not the mask. And too many times we're looking at the mask. May the Lord help us today to be among those who are found faithful. Amen.
Amen.